Thanks, Frank, for those provocative comments at the end, but also for the whole presentation and for doing a bit of audience profiling. I've been sort of jotting down people's names, put up their hand many times. It's great. I'll come and talk to those that have got all those multiple year funding agreements. I wonder if we can move straight on to the Honourable Bill Shorten for his presentation. Please welcome him.
It's a pleasure to be here. I wish to report to you on the Gillard government's national reform agenda in the not-for-profit sector. Regulatory reform is seldom a topic which sends a shiver down a spine. It is perhaps a topic at a conference which would inspire some to immediately rush off to catch up with an interstate colleague to have a cup of coffee. So I do thank you all for coming this morning, and I know that there's been a lot on at this conference and there's a lot still to go. But can I say to you that just as in the first term when I was the government representative in the area of disability, and I thought that was very important, now in our second term, I think tax reform and governance structures are very important topics too. Some of the work, or a lot of the work that your organisations do is for the most disempowered people in our community, and that's a fundamentally very good thing. The enormity of the task of which you have to deal with some days, I'm sure, must be daunting. The relentless unmet need of the disability service system, trying to create hope for long-term unemployed, delivering crisis accommodation to people with, who are homeless and might have other conditions, must be overwhelming some days. So the first thing I should do is just thank you for the work you do. But I'm here to also inform you that I think that regulatory reform is part of relieving and empowering you to do the work that you want to do on behalf of others. I think that the work that you do about redistributing the power that people don't have in their lives and giving them greater power, that's a fundamentally important goal in our society. And I think it's appropriate to tell you what we are doing in turn to make it easier, and also the path we still have to go. And I have to just say, I listened very carefully to what Frank said, and I always listen carefully. When he ventured the view that he wasn't having a go at one government and it was much the same under the coalition, I disagree. I think we're doing a better job than the Howard government. But your sector is broad, 600,000 at least 600,000 not-for-profit groups. There's 180,000 corporates, bodied corporate, 100,000 incorporated association, 12,000 companies limited by guarantee, 3,500 cooperatives. Those 12,000 companies limited by guarantee, the feds have fairly exclusive power. Nearly every other structure that we deal with is a matter of state and federal relationships. As a sector, you've been growing. You know the numbers, but they're worth repeating. 7.7% growth since 1990-2000 each year. You contribute $43 billion, it's estimated, to the Australian economy. You employ perhaps about 8 in every 100 people who go to work today in Australia. You're employing 8 of them. And you engage something like 4.5 million volunteers. So to put it in a context, I agree with what was said earlier. You're definitely at least as large as the whole transport and storage sector in Australia. Or put another way, your Linfoxes and your tolls would fit within the warehouse of the not-for-profit sector, but there'd still be some spare room. So your economic contribution is significant, and it's always worth looking at life through at least the lens of economics in addition to other lenses. But what you contribute through the social lens, the cultural lens, the environmental lens is equally important. You enrich communities, you do build upon core government services, and you do assist people to live empowered lives. As ACOSS knows, as you all know, not only your individual organisations and your grants and your contracts subject to constant review, but the whole not-for-profit sector has been reviewed constantly by governments and parliaments of all persuasions. Perhaps you have some form of inquiry fatigue. Over the past 15 years, there's been at least 5 major reviews. Some of these reviews have been very comprehensive. They've outlined recommendations of how you should change and how we can change our dealings with you. But these reviews have concluded, and we could probably write the next review now, if there was one being held now, is that your regulatory and taxation arrangements are complex, they lack coherence, and transparency, there is a high compliance burden, and they detract from your effectiveness. So there's the next findings of the next review yet to be commissioned, perhaps. And as I've said, the Commonwealth, the states, the territories, local governments regulate different parts of your sector for different and overlapping purposes. This uncoordinated regulation creates complexity, duplication, and inconsistency in our regulatory systems. The fact that there's more than 178 pieces of state and federal legislation involving 19 separate agencies to regularly determine the charitable purpose or status of an entity. The recommendations have in the main, these inquiries, been supported by stakeholders, especially those aimed at decreasing regulatory complexity. But over the last number of years, there has not been significant reform in the not-for-profit sector. This is in stark contrast to international trends, who's doing it well elsewhere. It's clear to me in my research that the United Kingdom, Ireland, New Zealand, Canada, the US, there have been significant reform programs embarked upon. I do think that we need to catch up. I do think the symptoms, thankfully, of inquiry fatigue there are cures to them. We made commitments at the 2010 election in the areas particularly led by Jenny Macklin and Senator Ursula Stevens. The Gillard government committed to the reform agenda. Our reform agenda was significant, it was complex. It will take time to finalise and implement. It has to be staged across different segments of the sector to reduce complexity, and it will require cooperation between Commonwealth and state governments. It also requires us to work in partnership and unity with the not-for-profit sector. I think that you can continue, as you have been, to give us insights and perspectives. We don't want to add another layer, and so what I'd like to do is just remind you of what our agenda is, then talk to you about some of the issues and directions about where we see we're going. We've said that we will establish a new not-for-profit sector reform council and an office for the not-for-profit sector to coordinate and drive reforms, work with the sector. We've said that we would do a scoping study for a national one-stop shop regulator to remove the complex regulatory arrangements. We would like to have greater harmonisation and simplification between state and federal laws. And of course, we'd like to reduce some of that compliance burden, red tape burden of people who contract with the government. We've committed to taking action in regard to the recommendations in the Senate Economic Legislation Committee and the Productivity Commission report. So I'd like to report to you further on how we're dealing with some of those issues. And what I'd say to you here is that we think that compromise, pragmatism and patience will be required, but some of these issues I go through, I think, highlight the way we've got to solve the problems. And the first one is the national one-stop shop regulator. There's a lot of buzz about it. It's taken a long time to get to this point. It's clear, though, that from submissions to the scoping study, the sector has strong views about the location of it, the functionality and the independence of any regulator. It's clear to me that there is a bit of a contest or a tension between independence and functionality, and I've got the clear message that independence is the priority and that we can build the functionality of the regulator up over time. We want to strike the balance between giving the sector what it wants, the costs of it, and also the risk of creating a new layer of bureaucracy. One idea one cost-effective option for the government to reform the existing Commonwealth regulatory arrangements is by enhancing the activities using the Australian Tax Office as the primary regulator. They have significant expertise on charitable law and taxation, and they could make this transition. It would reduce reporting costs, and we could move to reduce reporting costs and ask the ATO to establish a comprehensive information portal, and we would try and put in place structural separation to distinguish between the different functions of the ATO. But I have to say, many of you have expressed concern about that approach, about a potential conflict with the role of the ATO as regulator and protector of the revenue base. That on one hand, their desire to protect the revenue base may well contradict the other stated desire of a regulator, which is to provide independence, an independent regulator. Alternatively to using the tax office, the government could establish an independent standalone regulator. This would address that perception of conflict I referred to, and it would give the sector an independent identity within the hierarchy of government.